On a crisp October afternoon, Donald Trump arrived at a small elementary school in Pennsylvania as part of his presidential campaign. The school was located in the heart of a working-class area, where many families were striving daily to overcome economic challenges. Though the school's auditorium was modest and unassuming, the atmosphere inside radiated warmth. Bright banners hung along the walls with the words, "Make America Great Again," and "Future Leaders of America." On the stage, the American flag was prominently displayed, evoking a sense of pride and hope for a better future. The murmur of anticipation filled the room as students, parents, and teachers eagerly awaited Trump's arrival. When he finally stepped in, exuding confidence and wearing a friendly smile, the room erupted into applause and cheers. Trump moved slowly through the rows of seats, shaking hands with everyone he met. He engaged warmly with the teachers, asking about the students' progress. Not stopping there, he paused to take pictures with several children, their innocent faces lighting up as they waved small American flags in their hands. At one point, a young boy, looking up at Trump with wide eyes, asked innocently, "Mr. Trump, are you really going to change America?" Trump chuckled, placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder, and replied, "We're going to do it together, kiddo." The atmosphere in the auditorium grew even more vibrant. The room seemed to buzz with energy, as though everyone present could feel the sincerity of Trump's commitment. For them, this wasn't just another campaign event. It was a chance to hear and connect with a leader determined to bring change to America. After Mr. Trump finished his brief speech on the importance of education and building a brighter future for the next generation, he opened the floor for a Q&A session. The initial questions from parents focused on issues like job policies, healthcare, and infrastructure improvements. But then, amid the serious topics, an unexpected moment occurred. From the middle row, a little girl about 10 years old slowly stood up. She was wearing a light blue dress, her hair neatly tied into 2 braids. Although she seemed a bit shy, her eyes sparkled with curiosity and determination. Clutching the microphone tightly in her small hands, she took a deep breath and asked, her voice clear and innocent, "Mr. Trump, why do you want to be president? Even though people are always criticizing and saying bad things about you, don't you ever get tired?" Her question rang out clearly, leaving the entire room momentarily stunned. A few people gasped softly, while others whispered to those sitting next to them. The question, though simple, carried an honesty and directness that drew every eye in the room to Mr. Trump. A moment of silence passed. In the eyes of the audience was a mix of curiosity and a touch of anticipation, knowing that the strong-willed man on stage, someone who had faced countless criticisms and pressures, now stood before a question of profound significance, posed by a small and earnest little girl. Mr. Trump was briefly surprised by the question, but his familiar smile quickly returned. Instead of answering immediately, he stepped slowly off the stage, each step echoing softly on the wooden floor in the otherwise silent auditorium. When he reached the little girl, he bent down to meet her gaze, keeping his eyes level with hers. His voice, usually strong and commanding, softened, becoming more gentle and heartfelt than anyone had expected. "You know, sometimes I do feel tired. Tired of the criticism, tired of the weight I have to carry. But then I see kids like you, with eyes so full of hope and dreams that haven't yet been dimmed by the world, and I realize I can't stop." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink into the attentive silence of the room, then continued, "I'm not doing this to prove something to myself. I'm doing it for you, for your friends, for all the children in this country. You all deserve to grow up in an America where your dreams are never limited by fear or injustice." Trump's words weren't just directed at the little girl. They seemed to resonate with everyone in the room. A heavy silence filled the air, charged with emotion. as Trump looked deeply into her clear eyes, as if making a promise with every word he spoke. The little girl, though clearly moved by his answer, wasn't entirely satisfied. She lowered her head thoughtfully for a moment, then, lifting her gaze, her eyes shone with a mix of curiosity and determination. Her voice was soft but firm as she asked her next question. "But do you think someone else could do a better job than you? Maybe they wouldn't be criticized as much as you are." Her words cut through the silence like a bolt of lightning. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs. Some parents nodded slightly, impressed by the girl's innocent yet sharp question, while Trump's supporters held their breath, waiting for his response. Trump, still smiling confidently, studied the little girl for a moment. Instead of rushing his reply, he leaned in slightly, his voice steady but full of conviction. "You know, that's a great question, and I'll answer it honestly. There might be people out there who are better than me at certain things, but I don't believe anyone cares more about the future of this country than I do. When I decided to run for president, it wasn't to receive praise or avoid criticism. I did it because I love America and because I care about people like you and your family." He paused briefly, and his tone became even more resolute. "Sometimes, to do the right thing, you have to accept that not everyone will understand or agree with you. If everyone around you always likes what you do, maybe you haven't truly challenged anything wrong. I would rather be criticized for fighting for what I believe is right than be praised for doing nothing." Trump's answer left the room in thoughtful silence for a few moments. Then, a few claps began, slowly building into a loud round of applause. His supporters could feel the sincerity and determination in his words, while even the skeptics couldn't deny the power behind his response. The little girl looked at him with wide, thoughtful eyes, as if she were processing the depth of his words. After a moment, she nodded slightly, a small smile breaking across her face, as though she had finally found the answer she was looking for. The young girl, emboldened by her previous questions and Trump's thoughtful responses, straightened her posture, held the microphone firmly, and asked a question that would grip the entire room. "But if so many people dislike you, do you ever think you might be doing something wrong?" Her words carried a clarity and innocence that momentarily stunned the auditorium. It was a question that seemed both daring and deeply thoughtful, coming from someone so young. For a few seconds, the room was silent. The parents, many of whom had come expecting policy talk and campaign rhetoric, exchanged surprised glances. A few whispered softly to one another. The teachers, meanwhile, watched in quiet awe, their eyes flicking between the girl and Mr. Trump, as if marveling at the unexpected boldness of her question. This wasn't just a question posed to a political figure. It was a challenge, striking at the very heart of leadership, responsibility, and the weight of public opinion. Mr. Trump, standing at the center of the stage, seemed momentarily taken aback, not in discomfort, but in genuine surprise at the sharpness of her inquiry. For a brief moment, he simply looked at her, his expression shifting from surprise to amusement, and then to admiration. Instead of offering an immediate reply, he broke into a hearty laugh, the kind that filled the room and dissolved some of the tension hanging in the air. It wasn't a dismissive laugh. It was warm, genuine, and almost celebratory. He took a step toward the girl, his eyes meeting hers with a twinkle of respect. "You know," he said, his voice carrying both amusement and gravity, "that's a very good question. And let me tell you something, sometimes, doing what's right isn't always popular, and the people who do what's right aren't always well-liked." The room remained silent, everyone hanging on his words as he paused. Trump's tone grew more serious, his voice steady but charged with conviction. "If I stopped doing what I believe is right just because people don't like it, then I wouldn't be the kind of leader you'd want me to be, would I?" He took another step forward, his polished shoes making soft clicks on the wooden floor, echoing faintly in the stillness of the room. His presence seemed to grow larger, not through theatrics, but through the quiet power of his words. "You have to understand something," he continued, his voice resonant yet conversational, as if he were speaking to each person in the room individually. "The truth, it's not always easy to hear. It can make people uncomfortable, even angry. But if everyone around you always agrees with everything you do, then maybe you're not really challenging them. Maybe you're not even challenging yourself." Trump gestured subtly, as if inviting the audience to consider his point. "The biggest changes in history," he said, "didn't come from people who played it safe or who followed the crowd. They came from people who dared to go against the grain, not because they wanted attention or to cause trouble, but because they believed in something bigger than themselves, something worth standing up for." His voice softened slightly as he looked back at the girl, his gaze steady and unwavering. "The truth is, you can't make everyone happy. If you try, you'll lose yourself in the process. And if you stop doing what you believe is right just because people criticize you, then you'll never make a real difference." Trump paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the room. For a moment, it was as if time had frozen. Parents who had come with skepticism found themselves nodding silently. Teachers, many of whom had seen countless leaders come and go, exchanged glances that carried mutual respect for what they were witnessing. The young girl, her eyes fixed on Trump, seemed to be processing every word. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something but wasn't sure what. Around her, the murmurs of the audience began to fade as Trump continued. "Let me ask you this," Trump said, his voice firm but kind, directing his words to the girl, but clearly addressing everyone in the room. "What if someone told you to stop asking questions because they didn't like the answers you were searching for? Would you stop asking? Or would you keep going until you found the truth?" His words struck a chord. A few parents exchanged glances, nodding in agreement. One teacher placed a hand over her chest, visibly moved. The girl, meanwhile, tilted her head slightly, her expression growing more thoughtful. "You see," Trump added, "asking questions, standing up for what you believe in, even when it's hard, that's what makes a difference. And if you ever find yourself in a position where people criticize you for doing what's right, I hope you'll remember this moment. I hope you'll remember that it's better to stand alone for what you believe is right than to be surrounded by people who only tell you what you want to hear." The room, once frozen in silence, began to stir with energy. A faint clap came from the back, followed by another. Within seconds, applause rippled through the audience, growing louder and more unified. Parents, many of whom had come with preconceived notions about the man on stage, now found themselves caught up in the moment. A few wiped their eyes discreetly, while others clapped with renewed vigor. The teachers, standing near the edges of the room, nodded with quiet approval, their faces reflecting both admiration and pride, not just for the little girl's boldness, but for Trump's ability to meet her question with honesty and grace. And yet, amidst the applause, the little girl remained silent, her thoughtful gaze fixed on Trump. It was clear she wasn't clapping because she was still digesting the moment, still weighing his words against her own youthful understanding of the world. The air in the auditorium had shifted. It was no longer a campaign event. It had become something deeper, a conversation about truth, leadership, and the courage it takes to do what's right, even in the face of opposition. For a brief moment, Mr. Trump stood silent, his familiar, confident demeanor giving way to something quieter, more reflective. His eyes grew distant, as though he were sifting through the layers of his memory, pulling forth something deeply personal. The room, sensing the shift in his tone, fell utterly still, hanging on the edge of what he might say next. After a few seconds, he drew a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was slower, softer, and carried a weight of emotion that surprised everyone present. "I still remember a moment from my previous campaign," he began, his gaze sweeping across the audience before settling on the young girl in front of him. "It was in Michigan, in a small church. I'll never forget it. A single mother came up to me after the event. She held my hand. Her hands were trembling, and she just broke down in tears right there. She could barely get her words out." He paused, his voice catching slightly, the memory clearly still vivid and raw. He took another breath before continuing, his tone growing more intimate, as if he were sharing a piece of himself with the room. "She told me about her little boy," he said, his voice softening even further. "She said he had come home from school one day and asked her, 'Mom, why don't we ever have a nice meal like the other kids in my class?'" For a moment, Mr. Trump's voice faltered, the words catching in his throat. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, now carried a sheen of emotion that seemed to reach out to everyone in the room. He paused, letting the weight of the memory settle over the audience. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. Even the faintest noise seemed muted, as though the room itself understood the gravity of the moment. "I can't forget the look in her eyes," he continued, his voice now steady but tinged with emotion. It was a mix of pain, helplessness, and love, a love so fierce and unwavering for her son. She was working tirelessly, doing everything she could to provide for him, but no matter how hard she tried, it was never enough. And that one simple question from her little boy, it broke her heart. And you know what? It broke mine too. The room seemed to collectively exhale, the emotion palpable as Mr. Trump paused again. He shifted his gaze, now looking directly at the girl who had asked him the bold question that had led to this moment. His voice grew stronger, more resolute as he spoke. "Now think about it," he said, his tone steady but carrying the weight of his conviction. "If I gave up, if I walked away because of the criticism, the pressure, the constant attacks, who would stand up for families like hers? Who would listen to the questions of children like her son? If leaders like me throw in the towel because it's too hard, then who will fight for the people who need someone to stand up for them?" The emotion in his voice deepened, and for a moment, he seemed on the verge of being overwhelmed by the memory. But he steadied himself, drawing in another deep breath before continuing. "That's why I can't give up. That's why I won't give up. Because this isn't just about me, or even the people sitting in this room. It's about every single child across this country who looks up at their parents and asks a question like that little boy did. And it's about making sure that one day, they won't have to ask those questions anymore." The room remained silent, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. Some parents lowered their heads, their expressions somber as they absorbed the story. Others wiped away tears, moved by the raw emotion and sincerity of his words. Teachers standing near the back nodded quietly, their faces reflecting both admiration and empathy. The little girl, still clutching the microphone, seemed lost in thought, her youthful curiosity now tempered by the gravity of what she had just heard. Her eyes, wide and glistening with unshed tears, stayed fixed on Mr. Trump as he continued to speak. "It's questions like yours," he said, his voice softening as he addressed her directly, "and questions like that little boy's, that remind me every single day why I do this, why I fight through the exhaustion, the criticism, and the challenges. Because this country, this America, it isn't just for us adults sitting here today. It's for you, for your generation, for the kids who will grow up and change the world. And if I don't keep going, if I don't stand up for what I believe in, then I'm failing you." His voice caught slightly, but he pressed on, his tone now steady and full of purpose. "That's the responsibility I carry, and it's why I'll never let the critics stop me. Because every child in this country deserves a future where they don't have to feel the pain of that little boy's question, where they can dream big without fear or limits. The room remained still, the silence almost reverent. It was as if the audience understood that they had witnessed something rare, a moment of vulnerability from a man who was known for his toughness and resilience. Slowly, the silence was broken by the soft sound of clapping. It began tentatively, almost as if people were reluctant to disturb the profound moment. But the applause quickly grew louder, spreading through the room like a wave. Parents, teachers, and even children joined in, their hands coming together in a show of respect and gratitude. Somewhere near the back of the room, a parent whispered to their neighbor, "I didn't expect this today." That story, it hit home. He's not just talking politics. He's talking about real people, real struggles. The little girl, her youthful face now reflecting a mix of awe and understanding, looked up at Mr. Trump. Though she didn't fully grasp the weight of the story, she could feel its significance. With a soft, almost trembling voice, she said, "I understand now. Thank you." Her words were quiet, but in the charged stillness of the room, they felt like a thunderclap. The applause surged once more, filling the auditorium with an energy that was both emotional and unifying, as though every person present had been brought together by a shared sense of purpose and hope. Mr. Trump turned back to the young girl, his eyes reflecting sincerity and hope. He knelt to her eye level, his voice warm yet resolute. "You know, I believe that God places each of us in our positions not to seek praise, but to fulfill the missions He has set for us. I didn't become president to be loved by everyone. I do this because I feel a responsibility to stand up, to act, to bring about change. And I hope that one day, when you have the chance, you'll also have the courage to stand up for what's right, no matter how big the challenges or obstacles may be." The girl listened intently, but after a moment of silence, she looked up and asked, her voice soft yet filled with curiosity, "Are you ever afraid of failing?" The question struck like an arrow straight to the heart of anyone who has ever borne great responsibility. The auditorium held its breath, waiting for his answer. Mr. Trump chuckled softly, but his eyes remained serious. He stood tall, glanced across the room, then turned back to the girl, replying with a voice both strong and deeply heartfelt. "You know, I do fear failure. Who doesn't? Fear is natural, but if we let fear control us, we'll never accomplish anything meaningful. You will fail, maybe not just once but many times, but it's how you rise after failure that defines who you are." He paused for a moment, then leaned closer to her, his tone softening to something more personal and heartfelt. "Remember this, courage doesn't mean not being afraid. Courage is when you keep going, even when you are scared. And if you're doing what's right, even if you fail, you can still be proud because you gave it your all." The girl looked at him for a long moment, as though trying to grasp the full weight of his words. Then, she gave a small but determined smile, nodded, and said in a quiet yet firm voice, "I'll remember what you said." That moment touched everyone in the room. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but steady and full of empathy. A teacher standing nearby whispered, "That wasn't just advice for her, it was a lesson for all of us." Mr. Trump, after silently observing the audience's reaction, added, "We can never know the outcome of our actions, but if we let fear stop us, we'll never see the change we hope for. You, your generation, are the future of this country. Don't let fear take away your opportunities." His words served as encouragement, not just for the young girl, but for everyone present. And as stories of that meeting spread, they became a lesson in courage and determination for all who heard them. A moment of silence enveloped the room after Mr. Trump's response. The young girl stood there, her eyes filled with admiration and contemplation. After a brief pause, She smiled softly, her small hands gripping the microphone tighter, and said in a gentle but deeply emotional voice, "Thank you for not giving up." Those simple yet powerful words ignited a spark that set the entire auditorium ablaze with emotion. Applause erupted, growing louder and more prolonged with each passing second. Some parents hastily wiped away tears streaming down their cheeks, while teachers nodded in agreement, their eyes brimming with emotion. A teacher standing nearby couldn't help but smile as she leaned toward her colleague and whispered, "This girl is so bright." But his response went far beyond anything we could have expected. Mr. Trump looked at the girl, his gaze both gentle and resolute. He stepped closer, picked up a book about American history from the table, and signed it, writing a short yet profound message inside. Handing the book to the girl, he leaned down and said, "Dream big, and never forget that the truth has the power to change the world. I believe in your future." The girl took the book, her eyes shining brightly, and nodded softly, as if to say she would forever remember his words. That moment wasn't just an ordinary Q&A session during a campaign rally. The story of the little girl and Mr. Trump's message quickly spread across social media and news outlets. To many, the girl became a symbol of courage and innocent curiosity, while Mr. Trump represented a steadfast leader, unafraid to face challenges for the sake of the next generation's future. This event left an indelible impression not only on those who were present, but on countless others who heard the story. It became a powerful lesson for everyone. Dream big, believe in the truth, and never give up when you know you're doing what's right. The little girl that day didn't just receive a message from Mr. Trump, she left behind a message of her own. That hope, no matter how small, can inspire change and transform the world. The story of the meeting quickly spread across social media, capturing the attention of millions. A video of the young girl asking her question, followed by Mr. Trump's heartfelt response, became the center of conversation. Many praised Mr. Trump for his sincerity and ability to face tough questions from the very generation he is pledged to protect. One social media comment read, "He didn't just answer a question, he delivered a lesson on courage and responsibility." This wasn't just politics, it was passion. For many in the faith community, the story became a testament to Mr. Trump's strong belief in God and the sacred mission he feels called to fulfill. A pastor from Texas shared on his personal page, "Sometimes God places us in challenging situations not because we are strong, but to mold us into leaders." Mr. Trump has shown that with faith in God and love for people, he is not just a politician, but someone called to serve. Supporters viewed the event as a powerful reminder that the role of a leader goes beyond policy. It's about inspiring and instilling hope in the people. One social media user commented, "Being president isn't about pleasing everyone. It's about standing up for what's right, even in the face of criticism. And that's why we support him." This story wasn't just a memorable moment in the campaign. It became a symbol of faith, courage, and commitment to the future generation. It reminded everyone that sometimes the simplest questions from a child can spark the deepest lessons about responsibility, faith, and love for one's country. That extraordinary moment was more than just part of a campaign rally. It was a powerful reminder that sometimes love and truth have the strength to rise above all criticism. It was a moment when an innocent question from a little girl became a symbol of hope and faith in the future. For Mr. Trump, she was not merely someone asking a question. She was the embodiment of a young generation willing to dream, to face uncertainty, and to ask the toughest questions. She represented everything he was fighting for: faith, hope, and responsibility for America's future. In his closing remarks, Mr. Trump looked out at the audience, where eyes now brimmed with empathy and emotion, and said, "We will face doubt, failures, and criticism, but never let fear stop you from doing what's right." with faith, courage, and love for God, for your family, and for this country, we will always find our way to a better future. This story did not end as merely a campaign event. It carried a profound message of responsibility and hope. It served as a reminder that in the challenging journeys of life, sometimes all it takes is a little courage and a little faith to create monumental change. And along the way, young faces like hers are the greatest inspiration to keep moving forward.